What's going on, everybody? The thing about collecting cards that continues to strike me, that continues to really surprise me, is the direction in which my interests continue to change. And I think that we really should always be open to new things that we like, and to not feel like we shouldn't go into those new categories or into those new areas simply because some of our fellow collectors aren't doing it or aren't talking about it. If there's something that you like, I really think that you should look into it. I fought buying vintage golf cards for a long time. I didn't buy really any outside of that 1981 and 2 sets that are pretty common to find. And finally, about a year ago, I said, why am I not buying these? I love these things. So I have several Walter Hagen cards. I have several Bobby Jones cards. I got into those. I have a Gene Sarazen. I have several, and I'm not going to go through and list them all. But I really like that aspect of my collection. I like these 1888 Allen and Ginter Pirates of the Spanish Main set. I like them. And I'm enjoying hunting for them and adding them to my collection. So just because others aren't into it. Now, I will say that if you go into some of these little offshoots, into some of these little rabbit holes, there aren't necessarily, depending on where you go, going to be a lot of other people that dwell there. So it might be hard to find some of the cards. And then when you go to sell them, it might be harder to liquidate them. If you were to go late 1950s rookie cards as your focus, you're always going to have buyers for a Sandy Koufax rookie or a Bob Gibson rookie or, a Roberto Clemente rookie. You'll always have buyers for those. But if and when you get into something like, I don't know, early 1900 golf cards, there may not be a ton of people interested in a Harry Vardon card. I am, but that might be the exception, not the rule. But at the end of the day, the thing that I really think is important is that we are collecting the things that we enjoy. Now, if you look at your collection as a form of an investment, then I do think that part of the decision making should be, is this something that will hold value? Is this something that will grow in value? I use the examples of real estate all the time, right? And I may not mind living far from town at the end of a gravel driveway. That might be great for me. That might be perfect for me. I may not mind living on a busy street. And I might get a good deal on that house that's out, away from town at the end of the gravel driveway. And I might get a good deal on the house that's on the busy street. And one of the reasons I get a good deal on it is because a lot of people may not be interested in that. So if I were to get into the, Mars Attacks cards and they're cheap, well, one of the reasons they're cheap is because there's not a ton of people who collect them. And so if I get into them and they're cheap, then at some point when you sell them, you'll have, one of the great parts is the entry point was inexpensive. Well, the exit point will be more difficult and will be not as money will not flow your way like it would if it was a high demand card like Mickey Mantles and Willie Mays. Now, does that mean you should or you shouldn't go into them? No. My main thing is stay open-minded. Stay open-minded because some of the things that I've most enjoyed in collecting over the past few years have been some of the things that I never even considered collecting just a few years ago. And here I am buying cards in these sets that I never owned, never considered owning, but I'm having so much fun with it. So my question last week was basically, if you were to expand your collection into a new category, what would that category be? And a lot of people gave me feedback. And I want to go through a few of those responses here in just a second. But keep in mind, when we collect, collecting is really a healthy, positive hobby that keeps our mind active. And it keeps our attention away from things that we don't want to be focused on. And so if you enjoy learning about history, if in high school and college history was a class that you liked, then I can tell you, for me, one of the things I've enjoyed about collecting older cards is learning about the history of the companies, the history of the releases, the history of those players that I'm not as familiar with as the players that I grew up watching. And that's something to consider, is maybe if you get into one of these things you're not, and you say, oh, I'm not that familiar with that, I can't start collecting this because I don't really know a lot about early 1900s boxers. But that's okay. This is a perfect avenue to learn about that. Read some books on it, research it, check out some Wikipedia sites. Learning about these things is a lot of the fun because, again, if we're not growing, what are we doing? If we're just staying stagnant with where we're at, what's the point? But this is a great excuse to learn about things that you didn't already know about and do it in a fun hobby where there's still a common tie. So my main suggestion is stay open-minded to new sets, eras, sports, non-sports. And we're going to take a look at some of your responses here. And I think a lot of you have your eye on some really interesting stuff. Let's check them out. Happy belated birthday, Greg. Having been buying vintage for about a year and a half, my collection is a bit all over the place. 33 Gaudy, 56 Topps, pre-1960 Cleveland Indians. If I were to expand further, I'd probably get into 1900s sets, or at least one card from each. There's so many different rabbit holes, it would be a seamless transition from my already scattered collection. My friend Billy Ballgame says, I'm so happy for you and your unbelievably beautiful Ernie Banks rookie. I know you've wanted one for a long time. I'm happy I was able to share in your excitement with you. Me being a true card derelict, this week's question is tough to answer. I would like to expand into football, basketball, and hockey by picking up all the iconic rookie cards I can afford. But the largest area I am fighting to keep myself out of for a while is pre-war baseball. That is a very deep rabbit hole with many twists and turns. Once I go in, I may never come out. I don't want to go in there until I have most of the post-war that I want, because once I go down that pre-war rabbit hole, I may never come out. Congrats once again, Greg. Thanks for being a person I consider a friend. In addition to a sincerely kind email, he points out, I would dip into pre-war baseball cards. Do not own a one and would eventually love to. Just can't jump down that rabbit hole yet. All right, so I went to the Hall of Fame, I would say it was about 2005. So it's been about 20 years since I was at the Hall of Fame. And one of the things that stuck out the most to me, well, first of all, it's a beautiful town. It's a beautiful building. It's got some incredible artifacts. But one of the things that surprised me when I went 20 years ago, so I was about 25, was when we actually went into the hall and started looking at the plaques. It was interesting to me how many of those players from the early days I wasn't familiar with. I didn't know who they were. I kind of just assumed growing up, oh yeah, all the Hall of Famers, I know all the best baseball players of all time. But then you start to see some of these names and you're like, I don't recognize that name. I don't recognize that name. And it was always kind of on my mind of why didn't I learn about them? How do I not know about them? And I think that's one of the things that a lot of us talk about younger kids now is that they're not familiar with history. And we say, oh man, these kids nowadays, they don't know anything about the past and how things were and all these all-time greats. They don't know anything about them. But then I think back to myself and I'm like, I don't think I knew about as many of them as I should have. So I, 4 or 5 years ago, when I'm collecting, I was collecting the 50s and the 60s. And the reason I was doing that is because I was comfortable with those names. Ernie Banks, Hank Aaron, Roberto Clemente, Sandy Koufax, Bob Gibson, Mickey Mantle, Roger Maris. You just start going into these names and you're like, those are the guys I know. I know Yogi Berra, right? I don't know. I mean, I've heard of Bill Dickey, but I don't know as much about him, right? And as I decided that I was intrigued by these pre-war cards, one of the things that has been the most enjoyable is learning about the players. Going back and looking through Hall of Fame books and looking at the names and reading about them and then investigating them and learning about some of the records that they had and the teams that they played for and the era that they played for and some of the things that made them great. That has been really fun for me. And I would not have probably learned about those guys unless cards were the medium to introduce them to me. See, one of the things I've been doing is I've been working on a run of T206 cards. I want to have one card from each Hall of Famer from that set. Now, I'm never going to get Honus Wagner. I'm never going to get Eddie Plank. But I hope to get at least one Cobb and one Cy Young. And, I did pick up one Walter Johnson. I have one Christy Mathewson. But then there's some names in there that some people are less familiar with, myself included, going back just a couple, 3 years. So as I'm going through the checklist of Hall of Famers, and I go, okay, well, I don't have, Clark Griffith's card yet. I don't have, and I can go on and on, Vic Willis's card yet. And what ends up happening is as I see the names and I start to research the card and I start to research the player, I start learning about why they were great. It's sort of like back in school when a teacher would give you like a project, right? It's either you read the paragraph, you take notes on it, you answer questions on it, or they give you a project to do on, the events of the 1960s. And when you do the project, you kind of learn about the main events more organically than just the way that the author of the textbook wrote it. And it's more fun to learn that way. And you tend to remember it better. As a teacher, one of the things they say is someone doesn't truly understand something unless they could explain it to someone else. So if I'm going to do a video and I'm going to do a video on a T206 Hall of Famer or even not a Hall of Famer, my Chief Wilson card that I recently talked about. Now, Chief Wilson has one of the most unbreakable records in the history of baseball. Single season, he had almost 40 triples in one season. 40. Since 1950, I think like one person has more than 20. And I think it was Curtis Granderson. Now, why do I know that? I only know that because I collect cards. That's the medium that allowed me to learn about it. Don't be afraid of going into a category like pre-war, because you're like, I'm not as familiar with some of those players. I'm not as familiar with those names, so I don't want to collect cards about guys that I don't know about. How about you look at it differently? Look at it as, I'm going to learn about these players, and I'm going to learn about these cards, and then I'm going to say, that's one I really want. You know, I remember as a kid hearing the name Wee Willie Keeler a lot. And I remember hearing about Wee Willie Keeler because in the Ken Burns documentary, one of the things that I did was I remember the Joe DiMaggio hit streak. And the hit streak that Joe DiMaggio broke was Willie Keeler. And I knew that name, but you know what I didn't know about Willie Keeler until I was collecting cards of Willie Keeler? I didn't know he was a Yankee captain. The New York Highlanders, I didn't know that Willie Keeler was ever a captain of that team, but he was. And now I know that, and now I know a lot more about him because I've learned a lot about him and reading about him. Now, I'm probably just going on and on, but if you're thinking about getting into pre-war, maybe just pop in, what is it, inning 1 and 2 or 2 and 3, where it talks about the pre-war players in the Ken Burns documentary. And just watch them. And just hear the people that they are talking about and learn a little bit about them. And then look up some of their cards and look up some of the different, releases of their cards. And just start searching them. And I personally have found it to be really fun. And I think that a lot of you might as well. Now, I wouldn't say start buying things before you kind of know what you're buying. But the process of looking through the sets, looking through the players, looking through the Hall of Famers, reading about those guys is a great place to start. And I've had a blast doing it. And was I intimidated for a while about some of the names of some of these players? Sure. But you pick it up pretty fast. So don't be intimidated by that. Just start to kind of dip your toe into a set or two and see what you think. Look up the 39 play ball set. Look up the, 33 Gaudy set. Look up the T205 set, something like that. And just look through the cards, look through the names, and just kind of read about them. I think you'll be glad that you did. This comment says, "Hey Greg, glad you had an awesome national. I met a few of your YouTube buddies, but sadly did not see you there. My answer to this week's question was inspired by one of my national pickups. I mentioned in another comment a while back that I recently expanded from vintage football to vintage boxing, and I am loving it. My plan from boxing was to collect cards from 1900 to 1969. That changed at the National when I saw an 1890 Mayo cut plug Peter Jackson card that I knew I had to have. Jackson has an awesome story. He was actually an inspiration to Jack Johnson. And the card I bought is a great-looking SGC 1.5. Of course, my next move was to look into the rest of the set, and there are already several cards I want to pick up. They are very rare, so it'll take a while, but I really think going after 19th century boxing cards is going to be a fun chase, and a great way to expand my collecting." Now, I'm so glad that somebody pointed out vintage boxing cards for a couple of main reasons. And I'm not going to talk about this for a super long time, but I did want to point out a couple of things. The first thing I love about vintage boxing cards is these guys, these boxers, at that time, these guys were they were kings. They were superstars. They were amazing. This is before, basketball, and this is before football, and this is before, televised sports. And so what happens is there's a lot of these boxers out there that were major stars and major celebrities. And the other thing that I like about vintage boxing cards is not just that they were like larger than life figures, but there aren't a ton of names. So if you're interested in going, I'm kind of interested in pre-war cards, but I'm not really, there's so much with baseball. It just feels too overwhelming. But you want to kind of start learning about tobacco cards and the sets and what's rarer, which sets are common and which sets are rare. And you want some big names from that time. Now, I think that boxing is a great way to go. I mean, you got the Jack Johnsons, you got the Jack Dempseys, you got the John L. Sullivans. There aren't, it's not like there's 30 names or 40 names or 50 names that were at the top of the heap that you have to learn about. You can learn about 5 or 6 names, and then what you can learn about is the different releases and go, oh, these Churchman cards, those are actually fairly common compared to, these other sets, And a lot of these sets for boxing are also from the UK and from Europe and overseas. And that can be fun. So I really think boxing is a great place. If you're looking into getting into pre-war, and baseball just feels overwhelming, and basketball doesn't exist really, right? And football, there's a little bit, but not a ton. There is some, and the stuff that is there is pretty expensive. Boxing might be a place to consider. So I'm really glad somebody pointed it out, because I do think that it's a great place and an easier place to kind of get your feet wet with pre-war stuff. My friend Tony that I met in Cleveland says, that Banks rookie card looks even better in person. Congratulations. My answer to your question is a little different. I know this is not a sport, but I would collect Star Wars cards and other things related. I had a huge amount of the original movie cards, toys, figurines, etc., but they were lost at some point in my adolescent years. I was 8 years old in 1977, and that movie was spellbinding to me. It brings back so many amazing memories. That is really what collecting is all about, the emotional connections the particular collections elicit. Another comment says, I'm a big World War II history buff. If I were to get into something outside of baseball, I would probably choose World War II cards. So one of the areas that is quickly on the rise, that I think is picking up steam and popularity very rapidly, are non-sport cards. There are a lot of great channels out there that are incredible talking about non-sport cards. Breakout Cards, Ryan Nolan, phenomenal. Andrew with Nuff Said Cards. Collector, Not Hoarder. There are some great channels that know. They have forgotten more than I've ever learned about non-sport cards. But the prices of non-sport cards are gaining steam. And I think that you're starting to see a little bit more of it in the YouTube sphere, popping up a little bit here or there. And there are some common cards that you'll see. And then there are some less common ones that you'll see. But pretty much regardless of what you're interested in. If you're interested in history, there are some great cards all the way back to, the turn of the century. There's some great Ogden cards of different political figures and authors and, composers. And there's some awesome cards. There are a lot of sets in the early 1900s that are of, different inventors and different generals. And I'm not going to pretend like I'm an expert at them, because I'm not. I have other than my pirate cards, maybe 7 or 8, maybe up to 10 non-sport cards. But it's an area that I'm very, very interested in. I do have some Star Wars cards, and I love them. I've got a Yoda rookie card. I've got a Darth Vader rookie card. I've got some of that stuff. And I'm very, very drawn to and I feel myself getting kind of sucked into more of the non-sport stuff. I could totally see myself adding more of them to my collection. I'm just slowly starting to do some Facebook groups. I didn't have Facebook for a long time. I just got a Facebook account. I'm slowly starting to do some Facebook groups, and one of the ones I'm most interested in is the non-sport Facebook groups. I think that it's fascinating, and the thing that I love about it is no matter what it is that you're interested in, if it's U.S. politicians like presidents, there are sets. If it's guys like Ben Franklin and Einstein and Edison, there are sets and cards on those guys. If you're interested in movies and celebrities like actors and actresses, there are sets on those. Anything you can think of, there are sets on. And it's kind of fun, for me, the hunt, the dig of trying to find things that aren't as plentiful is fun. I mean, every card show that I go to this year will have several 1984 Topps Don Mattingly cards. And I have one. But if you want one of those, you could go on eBay right now and buy it and, pay your $12 or whatever, and you'd have it. But the cards you kind of have to hunt for. When you land it, man, that's a lot of fun. So if the nostalgia is what you're looking for, and you're thinking of during your youth, some of the things. Maybe you grew up in the era of the space race. There are different astronaut cards and sets that might bring back some enjoyment for you. I have collected, like I said, a lot of Star Wars cards. I totally get it. The nostalgia, that's one of the things that cards do, is they transport us from the stresses and the problems of life now to a time that we had this simpler life where we didn't have to think about all that other stuff that goes on. I've been doing home repairs all summer. I've built a fence, I fixed toilets, I had a freezer break. I mean, every time I turn around, there's something going on. And I want to escape from that. I want an escape. And think back to a time that, or a topic that brings you joy. And getting into that, I think, is a really good idea. I'll say that. Wrestling cards, vintage and or modern too. I'm sure a lot of people will brush this off, but I see very little wrestling video content on YouTube, and I've watched a lot of YouTube. Though the reason I say is because the WWE has no off-season, which makes it unique and different from the MLB, NBA, NFL, and NHL, etc. So there's ample opportunities for buying and selling and trading opportunities. Also, the WWE will be shown on Netflix starting in January of 2025. There's also a huge global reach, too. They continuously go to different countries for their biggest pay-per-views. Their YouTube channel has over 100 million subs. I can go on and on. This comment says, congrats on snagging that beautiful Banks card. On the new question for the week, it's funny that you asked this question, as the past month I have gotten into something that I've never thought I would start collecting. I have always been a baseball and football card collector, but rarely anything else. This past month I have gone bananas collecting vintage basketball on eBay. I have picked up every Hall of Fame player in the 69 and 70 top set, which I believe there are 25 of them. The majority are rookie cards as well. I know these are tall boy cards, and some people don't like the size, but I just love them. These are all the players I watched when I was a kid, born in '62. Basketball was huge when I was young, as many in my family were huge Celtics fans. The great thing about these cards is you can get the majority of them for under $100 in PSA or SGC 6 to 7. I found it exciting to look for the best examples with great centering and was able to negotiate some amazing deals. And this one says, on your question for next week, I collect a little of everything, but buy only baseball cards. I do have a variety of other sports that have just fallen in my lap. However, if I were to buy a non-sport card, it would most likely be the great one, Wayne Gretzky. Okay, I wanted to throw in some other comments because I get it. I think they're great. You know, I have some wrestling cards. I have a early Hulk Hogan card. It's not his first one, but it's one of his main early ones. I have a few Hogan cards. I get it. And why do I have them? Because when I was a kid watching WrestleMania, that was awesome. I loved it, right? Monday Night Raw when I was in high school, like that was awesome. I loved all that stuff. You know, I have some hockey cards. I have, a fair amount of Gretzky cards. I don't have his rookie, but I have, several of his cards. I get it. I have a lot of vintage basketball cards. I have a lot of vintage football cards. I have a wide variety of things. And I mentioned earlier my golf cards. I love collecting golf cards. I have some soccer cards. I guess my suggestion, my thought is that just as a reminder, whatever it is that you are drawn to, consider collecting those cards. It doesn't have to be 100% of your interest. It could be a small percent of your interest. It could be 10% of your collection. If I look at my pirate card collection, it might make up 10% of my total card collection value. It's not an overwhelming amount, but it's fun to have this kind of side thing going. So don't get to the point where you say, oh, no, I only collect 1960s stuff. See, there's a fine line between being content. There's a fine line between being focused and being too focused to where you're not willing to consider collecting other things that might add to your joy. So some of us have the problem, maybe myself included, of wanting everything. And some of us might have the opposite, where we're so focused that we only collect like one category that I think that we're missing out. There's definitely a fine line between the two. But I thought it would be fun to talk about different categories besides the category that we're currently interested in, because what it could do is it could go, hey, yeah, maybe I should look into that. That's just my take. Now, my question for this week I have for you. What is the one set that you think will increase in value the most over the next 5 to 10 years? Examples like, do you think the 1957 Topps football set or the 1915 Cracker Jack set are going to go up the most? Now, some people hate talking about card values. Oh, why are we talking about values again? It's always about values. Well, if there's something that you want, a lot of us go, someday I'll get into pre-war. Someday I'll buy some T206s. Someday I'll buy some 52 Topps baseball. Someday I'll buy Jim Brown cards. Someday I'll finally buy my O-Peachy Wayne Gretzky. The problem is something is going to go up faster than everything else. Now, what will it be? None of us really know. We can have guesses. And that's the point of this. What's your guess? But there are some things like, you know, the guy who rents every month he rents an apartment. Says, at some point I'll buy a house. Just not yet. I'll buy a house. And then he gets to the point where the houses are just so expensive, it's almost impossible to buy a house. If you think that the 1915 Cracker Jack cards are the ones that are going to go up the most over the next 5 years or 10 years, the reason that matters is because if you don't buy them soon, they might become unaffordable. And there are a lot of people who I think look back and go, yeah, I can't afford this or that anymore. I can't afford a 52 mantle anymore. I missed the window. A totally beat up 52 mantle now is what? 40 grand? 35,000? Some people are like, but if you go back 10 years, it might have been 10. So for some of us, the window has closed. So my question to you guys is, what do you guys think, if you were to look forward 5 or 10 years, is going to go up the most? Is it going to be a certain football set, a certain player? Is it going to be a certain year for baseball? Tell me what you think, because if we can kind of come up with some hypotheses as to what it is, it might accelerate our the speed at which we need to kind of get them before they become unaffordable. And some people are going to say everything is going to go down. I don't think everything is going to go down over the next 10 years. I don't think that's going to happen. What do you think it's going to be that's going to go up? I look forward to sharing your thoughts and your opinions next week.